As the Owl House approaches its conclusion, one could say that the show is in danger of flubbing that conclusion, just as Star versus the Forces of Evil is often said to have done. My perspective on Star's ending is a bit more complicated, as I discussed in a previous video, but I'm not going to defend the ending as being good, exactly. I believe it is more of a system of the show's overarching holistic rot than some sharp, abrupt turn that breaks and destroys a show that was otherwise great before that point. But as we await for the Owl House's conclusion, one could express, perhaps with some anxiety, that the Owl House nonetheless could repeat a lot of those mistakes. After all, it is still a show based on magic. It is still a show playing with these two different worlds. And it is a show that is not always 100% clear on how the protagonist should relate to this division between the worlds. Do they owe more to the world they came from, or to the magical world they've spent so much time in? Which is more their world? But I do not believe the Owl House is in danger of falling into the same trap that doomed Star versus the Forces of Evil. Why? Why am I so certain? Is it just because the show is better than Star? Well, yes, it is better, but my argument is a little more complicated than that. I would say that Star, in Season 3, and especially in Season 4, the final season of that show, Star really lost control of that narrative. What do I mean? I mean that it lost the sense of why the narrative was ongoing, what it was going toward. There is no such thing as a show that definitively runs too long or not long enough. There is no factual, measurable marker that we can use to determine how long a show should run for. But a show needs to run for as long as it has story to tell. And as long as it knows how to tell that story in a way that is both satisfying in the short term and demonstrates that the show is, in the long term, working toward an eventual resolution. That may sound obvious. No one consciously makes a show to say, in Season 3, what is happening here has no significance. That's not how the creative process works. But there are nonetheless two kinds of shows. There is the kind of show that maintains a strong, incisive grasp on what function exactly every episode serves in the larger context of the narrative and the journeys of these characters and the relationships between these characters. And then there is the kind of show that is stumbling through the dark, that is not going nowhere specifically, but is going nowhere definite. It may have an ending in mind, or it may not, but it does not have a clear idea of what every step on that path does to advance the characters and the narrative toward that ending place. Peter Brooks has a wonderful book called Reading for the Plot. And in this book, he emphasizes the importance of how plots are constructed. Now, obviously, there is a simplistic and reductive way of looking at plots, where a story is nothing but its plot. I call this Wikipedia reading, where you don't actually watch a movie or a show, you just read the Wikipedia entries to understand what happened. The difference between the Wikipedia version and the actual show version, that's art. If you want to know what art is, it is in that gap. It is an experience. It is an execution. It is in the forms and structures used to convey these emotional and psychological and philosophical truths. It is not merely the externality. It is not merely the succession of events. It is the inner essence of those events. It is the spirit of those events, the impressions created by those events, the impacts those events leave on the psyche. That is art. It is not character A walks along the high road to get to point B. It is also not a simple description of the different journeys the character goes along that high road. It is what could not be described by simply scientific material observations. It is the psychological, sociological, experiential value. It is the inwardness of those moments. That is what art is. But plot does matter too. Plot matters in the sense that it relates to those experiences. Plot serves the experiences. It serves the moments and impressions of the characters. If those characters come to merely serve the plot, then the plot structure becomes too rigid and too dogmatic. This is the exact fault that E.M. Forster finds with the novels of Henry James, and if it is true of someone of Henry James's caliber, it is far more true of a lot of works these days that are written primarily for plot and not for the space between plot points, that is, the artistic experience. But the plot still matters. The plot matters in that, as Brooks is saying, characters are advancing toward a resolution. They are advancing toward some sort of ending. There has to be an ending, but it also has to be the right ending. Perhaps this sounds rather abstract, and Brooks makes it a lot more abstract. He discusses it in the sense of the two drives Freud discusses, the life drive and the death drive. The life drive, or the erotic drive in Freud's view, is the impulse to go on, to pursue desire, while the death drive does not always necessarily mean we're suicidal, although Freud can be a bit overly literalist at times. But it means we want something to cease. It means we want to pull back. It means we want that desire to be extinguished. We want to stay where we are. And reading, for Brooks, links these two desires together. When we're reading a good book, we want to go on. We want to keep reading. But we also want to know that the reading experience is not eternal. It's going to end at some point. It has to, or else there's no substance to it. And it's the same thing for us when we're going on an adventure. Say you're traveling to Rome. We go on that experience because hopefully we have some image of what we want. Perhaps it's just, oh hey, I want to see the Colosseum and the Roman Forum. Or perhaps it's something more fundamental, like, I want a broader perspective on the world. I want a window outside my ordinary way of seeing the world. Alright. But for that experience to have significance, and for it to be able to be placed into a larger context, it also needs to end. There needs to be a kind of ceasing. This is inevitable. But it needs to be the right endpoint. It needs to be the right point of ceasing. if you're going on a trip and you want to see sites X, Y, and Z, seeing sites X, Y, and Z would be the point, the purpose, the meaning. And after that, you can return and feel changed to some extent. For art, good art, it can be a little more complicated. The Owl House I love because it keeps the character journeys at the forefront. It keeps what it wants for these characters in close perspective. Luce is not journeying on continuously. She's journeying on for a point of transformation. A point of coming to a greater understanding of herself and what she really wants for herself. So she can approach the choice of whether to stay in the human world or the Boiling Isles in a way that is far more mature and sophisticated than when she was a relatively immature person at the beginning of the show, where she's just of the mind, oh hey, I hate my ordinary life, I don't fit in, I want to leave. This place, the Boiling Isles that I find myself in, is so much better and more interesting and more appropriate to my interest than my life at home, so I'm staying here. That's a fine point of view for a kid, but it's ultimately limited. And by the end of the show, she has come to a broader sense of what she wants for herself. And the ending of the show will be measured, I believe, by how it demonstrates that experience that she has undergone, how it demonstrates the weight and the significance of that experience. Now, that does not mean Brooks is saying all characters need to change. He is simply saying that all characters need to have had the sense that the experiences they have undergone are of some weight, are of some significance, that there is a reason that this part of a person's life is being told. There is that in the Owl House, and there is not that in Star versus the Forces of Evil. I don't want to say that Star went on for too long. It is certainly conceivable that Star could have gathered more force and more verve and more imagination in its last 2 seasons and finished very strong. There is nothing about the premise of the show or the narrative of the show that means it cannot run for at least 3-4 seasons. But what I am saying is that the show loses its way. It loses not just control of certain elements or certain views of thinking of magic or of thinking of Star or Marco, but of what it is these characters are at every moment working for, what every chapter has to serve in the greater organic project of the work. Star versus the Force of Evil loses that. It becomes scattered, it becomes dissolute, so its ending could only inevitably be a mess. The Owl House's ending, I do not believe, will be a mess like that. It won't be a perfect ending for everyone. No ending is, and no ending should really try to be, especially if trying to please everyone results in tepid, bloodless, formulaic decision-making. But it will likely be an ending that is appropriate to the journeys and experiences these characters have undergone, which is what matters. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can and you want to see more videos like this. I hope that the show is able to pull Luce to a sense of resolution. Not perhaps to a sense that her entire life is fixed and she can live in utopian paradise, but in a sense that the challenges that she has undergone are no longer as intimidating to her as they once were. The challenges she has undergone are not as intimidating to her as they once were. So anyway, tune in soon for my next analysis. It will be coming soon. Promise you that. Thank you all again. Adios, comrades.